Yuri Bezmenov. Did you and Yuri ever meet? Did you ever meet Yuri?
No, no, you're the first one. No, you're not the first one. There is there's an aura around Bezmenov that he built up, and gullible conservatives in the United States ate up. The man was a fraud. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Tell me why he's a fraud and based on which...
Okay. Bezmenov, first of all, Bezmenov was never KGB.
Okay.
That's a fact. Bezmenov had an association with the KGB as a journalist. His travel to the United States is quite interesting. At one point, he was stationed in India, and he decided to defect in some way, and so he disguised himself as a hippie, and he traveled around in India for a while, and eventually he must have connected with the CIA and wound up in the United States. And so Yuri Bezmenov wasn't much of anything, so he had to make a living. And smart enough he was, he concocted this whole idea how the Soviet Union had this master plan to, in stages, to undermine the United States. Yes, they had a plan.
How do you know that? I'm curious. I was expecting you to say something like the way you did. I fully expected you to undermine Yuri 1,000,000%, because I know your background and I know which side you are politically. But I'm curious to know from your end, how do you know for a fact he was a fraud? How do you know he was not the real deal?
Okay, all right. He was not KGB. How would he? If the KGB was good at something, very good at something, and anybody who has had any contact with the KGB was keeping things secret. If they had this master plan, a journalist who's not even in the KGB wouldn't know anything about it. Number one. Number two, and this is my own observation. I was trained by some of the best, because I was one of the few elite agents that they sent in the United States. They had to give me the best. And some of those folks had spent some time in the United States as diplomats or maybe journalists, and they thought they knew something about the United States, and they didn't, because what the advice they gave me and the stuff they taught me was off the wall wrong, not correct. And it is pretty much acknowledged an agreement that neither the United States knew very much how the Soviet society operated, and neither did the Soviet Union.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to ask is, how do you know he was a fraud, though? How do you, for a fact, know Yuri was a fraud? I'm curious.
No, I'm just saying it out loud because I don't know for a fact.
Okay, so you're just speculating, is what you're saying.
But it's speculation that's based on personal knowledge, and it's based on if the KGB had such a plan, as I said, they wouldn't have told him. Secondly, I know what they did, and I know, you're familiar with active measures? Very much so. Okay, active measures was a focus, particularly on Andropov, and this is factual. This comes out of the archives of the KGB. There's a guy who was archivist, and he smuggled out a bunch of material by the name of Mitrokin, and active measures were somewhat successful, and that's how you try to undermine the United States. But if that was the best they had, where does the other plan come from? They couldn't even come up with one.
What do you mean?
It makes no sense.
Stalin came up with it in 1923, where the disinformation program that was come up with years ago, Subversion by Sun Tzu, which the ultimate way to beat your opponent is to manipulate and think you're not really fighting them by using somebody else in a proxy war, and they were very effective. I mean, if you're gonna say so, here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to do. I want to play the clip of Yuri, and you know which clip I'm going to play for you, and I'm going to go through the 3 steps, and I want you to tell me which part of what he says is a complete lie and doesn't make sense. I'm just curious.
Okay. Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization.
So which part of what Yuri just said do you disagree with?
Now, let me just start with what I agree with. He talks about active measures, and that is accurate, it's correct. He also talks about the demoralization of the nation, and he actually makes a good point. This is primarily happened internally, all right? And a lot of this, in my view, started with the Vietnam War and the anti-war protest movement. He does not make the connection. He doesn't connect the dots between what the KGB did and what happened in the United States. That is not there. And he can't make it because he can't prove it.
Forget about that. I don't care about that. What I care about is how much of what he's saying actually was done and has credibility, because it's tough to dispute that Russia didn't successfully inject the spirit of communism in Karl Marx in U.S. universities and get younger kids to believe that Marxism is the way to go. I mean, if you look at some of the surveys that's coming up right now from Harvard University, 64% of students at Harvard support socialism, and they don't like capitalism. So it was an effective method, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the question is, how did they do it, and who did it? They didn't have a lot of people in the United States that could have done this. This was homegrown. Communism and this whole idea of, everybody getting along together is an extremely attractive ideology for young people. You don't need much. Now there have been liberal socialist streaks in America historically, going all the way back, and they have grown, and they have particularly taken hold in universities and academia, and so I agree that we now have already 2 generations who have been taught by people who became anti-American during the Vietnam War. Now, did the Soviet camp contribute to all of this? Of course we did. But the KGB itself, and this is where I think I'm saying that Bezmenov is a fraud, had nothing to do with it because they weren't really capable of doing what he said they were doing.
They weren't really capable of doing what they said they were capable of doing.
Let me try to point out the facts of the matter. The active measures, as I said, under Andropov, who was in charge in the 80s, he actually issued a command that everybody in the KGB should be involved in active measures.
Okay.
It was really important to him.
Yeah.
But the department in which active measures were executed was not very desirable. So, first directorate, the one that did espionage, that was the number one. I forgot the directorate that did active measures. That was for losers. This is a quote out of Mitrokhin that came out of the study of the archives of the KGB. They had some successes and they failed miserably in many other respects. Now, I'll give you a couple of successes. J. Edgar Hoover being a cross-dresser, that was planted by the KGB. The CIA inventing the AIDS virus, that was planted by the KGB. And there were a few other cases where they were able to discredit.
So J. Edgar Hoover was never a cross-dresser?
No, he wasn't.
You're saying J. Edgar Hoover was never a cross-dresser?
He was not. I mean, I can only tell you that, assuming that the notes that Mitrokhin took in the archives are absolutely 100% good, and I tell you what, there is a lot of proof that they are that we don't know about, because there's a lot of agents that went belly up after these notes came out. So, assuming that he is correct, he says that was an active. He traces his back how this story was planted.
So if you like this little short clip from an interview I did, click over here to watch the entire interview. And please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.